I'm Maya, 34, female, and at my own birthday dinner, my sister announced she was pregnant with my husband's baby. That single moment didn't just break my heart. It detonated a bomb in the middle of my life, exposing years of secrets I was forced to keep and lies I never even knew existed. The restaurant was my favorite, a cozy Italian place with checkered tablecloths and Chianti bottles holding melted candles. It was supposed to be a quiet celebration for my 34th birthday, just me, my husband Mark, my younger sister Zoe, and our parents. Mark had arranged it all, presenting the idea to me with a kiss on the forehead and a murmur of, "You deserve the best, honey." Looking back, that sentence feels less like a compliment and more like a carefully crafted lie. Mark was, or so I believed, my rock. At 36, he was a successful sales director, confident and charming, the kind of man who could command a boardroom and then come home to help me grade my students' papers. We had been married for 5 years, and our life was a portrait of comfortable stability. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared dream of one day moving to a house with a bigger yard. My sister, Zoe, was the beautiful chaos to my quiet order. At 28, she was a part-time yoga instructor who still lived with our parents, forever chasing a new passion that never quite paid the bills. In our family, she was the sun, and I was the planet that quietly orbited her. This wasn't a new dynamic. It was the foundation of our entire childhood. I remembered a time when I was 10 and she was 4. I had spent a whole month saving my allowance to buy a delicate glass unicorn. Zoe, in a fit of toddler energy, knocked it off my dresser, shattering it into 1,000 tiny pieces. When I cried, my mother didn't comfort me. She scooped Zoe into her arms and told me, "Maya, it was just a thing. Your sister is more important." That phrase became the unspoken motto of our family: Zoe is more important. When she dropped out of college after one semester, my parents paid off her student loans without a word. When I graduated with honors, they told me they were proud, but reminded me not to make Zoe feel bad about her own choices. I learned to swallow my achievements and my disappointments, keeping them small and palatable so they wouldn't upset the family's delicate ecosystem. When I brought Mark home for the first time, he seemed to see me in a way no one else in my family did. He listened to my stories about teaching, celebrated my small victories, and looked at me with an admiration that felt like coming home. Crucially, he was kind to Zoe, but in a way that I mistook for polite, brother-in-law affection. He'd laugh at her dramatic stories and offer her casual advice, and I'd feel a swell of pride. "See," I thought, "my husband is so good, he even has patience for my sister." The biggest secret between Mark and me was one we had established early on, before the wedding. One evening, as we discussed our future, he grew quiet. With a pained expression, he confessed that he couldn't have children. He'd had a vasectomy 7 years prior, after a difficult breakup in his 20s. He was ashamed, not of the decision itself, but of the judgment he feared from his own traditional family. He made me promise I would never tell a soul, especially not my parents or sister, who were notoriously terrible at keeping secrets. "It's our business, Maya. Only ours," he had said, his eyes pleading. I agreed without hesitation. I loved him, and while I'd once imagined being a mother, being his wife felt more important. I held his secret in my heart like a sacred vow, a symbol of our unique trust. It was the one thing in the world that was truly, completely, ours. I had no idea that this secret, the very proof of my loyalty to him, would one day become my only weapon. The day of my birthday started with a strange sort of stillness. Mark had left for work early, leaving a hastily scrawled note on the counter next to a single, perfect rose. "Can't wait to celebrate you tonight. Love, M." It was a sweet gesture, but it felt impersonal, like something a character would do in a movie. I shrugged it off as him being busy with a big quarter-end push at his company. All day at school, as my second graders presented me with handmade cards decorated with glitter and crooked hearts, I felt a persistent, low-level hum of anxiety. I told myself it was just birthday jitters, the melancholy that can sometimes creep in as you mark another year gone by. But it was more than that. It felt like the air before a storm, heavy and charged. Mark was unusually distant when he came home to get ready. He spent a long time on his phone in the study, and when I walked in, he clicked it off quickly, a little too quickly. "Just finalizing some work stuff," he said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He complimented my dress, a simple, elegant navy blue sheath, but his gaze seemed to look right through me. He was there in body, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. I tried to connect with him, wrapping my arms around his waist as he knotted his tie. He patted my hand absently. "We should get going, honey. Don't want to be late." We arrived at the restaurant a few minutes after my parents, who were already seated with Zoe. My mom immediately fussed over Zoe's outfit, a trendy dress that was far more eye-catching than mine. "Oh, Zoe, you look stunning. Doesn't she look stunning, David?" My dad nodded in agreement, beaming at her. They gave me a perfunctory, "Happy birthday, dear," before their attention snapped right back to Zoe. It was the same old story. Zoe herself was practically vibrating with a nervous energy that she was trying to mask as excitement. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Happy birthday, big sis," in my ear, but it felt performative. Throughout the appetizers, she barely looked at me. Instead, her eyes kept darting toward Mark, a flicker of something, collusion, anticipation, passing between them when they thought no one was looking. But I was looking. I saw it. I tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. I was being paranoid. I was letting my old insecurities about Zoe get the better of me. This was my birthday. Mark loved me. My family was here to celebrate me. I clung to these thoughts like a mantra, trying to force them into reality. "So Maya," my dad said, turning to me as if suddenly remembering the purpose of the dinner. "How's teaching?" "It's good, Dad," I began, ready to share a funny story about one of my students. But before I could get a full sentence out, Zoe interrupted. "Oh my gosh, you guys will not believe what happened at the studio today," she said, launching into a long, dramatic story. My parents leaned in, captivated. Mark chuckled at all the right moments. I just sat there, my half-told story dying on my lips, feeling like a ghost at my own party. Mark caught my eye for a brief second, and in his face, I saw a flash of something that looked like pity. That was worse than the neglect. The meal continued like that, a symphony of my family's typical dynamic, with Zoe as the soloist and me as the quiet percussionist, only there to keep the rhythm. The air grew thicker with unspoken things, and the knot in my stomach tightened until it felt like a stone. The waiter appeared with a small tiramisu, a single candle flickering in its center. The familiar, off-key tune of Happy Birthday filled the space around our table. My parents sang with gusto, Zoe joined in with a flourish, and Mark's baritone rumbled beside me. For that one moment, everything felt almost normal. I closed my eyes, made a wish for peace and happiness, and blew out the candle. Everyone clapped. "Speech, speech," my dad cheered. I laughed, feeling a bit of the tension ease. "Oh, I don't know, I just want to say thank you all for being here, it means a lot to me." My gaze rested on Mark. "And thank you, honey, for putting this all together." He smiled, but it was thin, brittle. "Of course," he said. As I picked up my fork, Zoe cleared her throat. She pushed her chair back slightly and stood up, placing her hand on the table. "Actually," she said, her voice trembling just enough to command everyone's full attention. "While we're all here, I have something to announce." A silence fell over the table. My mom looked at her with wide, expectant eyes. "What is it, sweetie?" Zoe's eyes didn't look at my mom. They didn't look at me. They found Mark's across the table. He reached out, and with a deliberation that felt both shocking and slow, took her hand. He entwined his fingers with hers right there on the white tablecloth, next to the birthday dessert. My fork clattered onto my plate. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It was a mistake. A joke. Some bizarre performance art piece Zoe had cooked up. "Mark and I have fallen in love," Zoe said, her voice gaining strength. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. My dad's jaw went slack. My mom's hand flew to her chest, her expression a mixture of confusion and shock. I felt nothing. It was as if my entire emotional register had been wiped clean, leaving only a buzzing white static. I stared at their joined hands. Mark's, strong and familiar, the hand I held every night. Zoe's, slender and adorned with the silver rings she always wore. They looked so natural together, so right, and that fact was the cruelest cut of all. But she wasn't finished. She took a deep breath, her other hand coming to rest protectively on her stomach. Her gaze finally landed on me, and it was filled with a chilling mixture of pity and triumph. "And I'm pregnant," she declared to the stunned table. "We're having a baby." The static in my head vanished, replaced by a deafening roar. Every happy memory I had with Mark, every moment of trust, every whispered "I love you," curdled and turned toxic. Every sacrifice I had made for my sister, every time I had stepped back to let her shine, coalesced into this one, cataclysmic moment of betrayal. They hadn't just gone behind my back. They had built a new life on the ashes of mine and chosen my birthday, my celebration, as the stage for their grand reveal. They wanted to humiliate me, to break me down completely, to ensure I understood my new place in the world they had created. I looked at my husband, the man who had promised to protect my heart, and saw a stranger. I looked at my sister, the person who shared my blood, and saw my enemy. In the ringing silence that followed Zoe's announcement, everyone's eyes swiveled to me. They were expecting tears, a screaming match, a dramatic scene. My mother was already half rising from her seat, ready to perform her role as a mediator, which always meant comforting Zoe. My father just stared, his face a pale mask of disbelief. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me had snapped and been replaced by a strange and terrible calm. The shock had burned away, leaving behind an icy, diamond-hard core of clarity. I slowly placed my napkin on the table. I took a sip of water, the movement measured and deliberate. The sound of me swallowing was audible in the tomb-like quiet. I looked at Zoe, whose triumphant expression was just beginning to curdle into confusion at my lack of response. Then I turned my head and fixed my gaze on Mark. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the tablecloth, his knuckles white where he gripped Zoe's hand. He was a coward, a pathetic, spineless coward. I let out a small, quiet laugh. It wasn't a laugh of mirth. It was a dry, hollow sound that seemed to surprise even me. "Wow," I said, my voice steady, almost conversational. "That's quite an announcement." My mother found her voice first. "Maya, honey, we don't know what to say." "Don't worry," I said, holding up a hand to stop her. "There's really only one thing to say." I leaned forward slightly, making sure I had everyone's undivided attention. I looked from my mother's worried face to my father's stunned one. I looked at Zoe's smug, expectant expression. And finally, I looked directly at Mark, forcing him to lift his head and meet my gaze. In his eyes, I saw panic. He knew what was coming. He knew the secret I had guarded for us for 5 years. He knew, and he was terrified. "A baby," I mused, tilting my head. "That's a neat trick." I let the silence hang for a beat, enjoying the flicker of fear that crossed his face. "Especially for a man who can't have children." Zoe's face contorted. "What are you talking about? You're just saying that to be cruel." "Am I?" I asked, my voice as cold as ice. I never took my eyes off Mark. "Tell her, Mark. Tell them all, or should I?" He just sat there, frozen, his face ashen. He was going to make me do it. Of course he was, I sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "You really are a coward." I turned to my family. What my husband and my sister have conveniently left out of their little announcement is a very important medical fact. I paused, letting the words sink in. Mark had a vasectomy 7 years ago, 2 years before he and I even met. He is sterile. It is physically impossible for him to be the father of your child, Zoe. The bomb had been detonated. The shockwave radiated outward, hitting everyone at the table. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My dad just stared, shaking his head in slow, dumbfounded disbelief. But the best reaction was Zoe's. Her face cycled through a rapid series of emotions: defiant disbelief, then dawning confusion, and finally sheer, unadulterated panic. Her eyes darted from my face to Mark's, searching for a denial that wasn't coming. "Mark," she whispered, her voice a tiny, broken thing. "Is she lying?" Mark couldn't speak. He just slumped in his chair, the picture of a man utterly defeated, exposed to the world. And in that moment, seeing their perfect, triumphant announcement crumble into ashes, I didn't feel happiness. I didn't feel vengeful joy. I just felt a vast, empty relief. The truth was out. The secret was no longer mine to carry. It was theirs now, a weight that would crush them both. I stood up from the table. My legs felt surprisingly steady. I placed my purse on my shoulder and looked down at the 4 people who had once constituted my entire world. They were a tableau of destruction. Mark, gray and shrunken. Zoe, her face a mess of tears and dawning horror. My mother, fluttering helplessly, my father, looking older than I had ever seen him. "Well," I said to the room at large, my voice clear and devoid of emotion. "Happy birthday to me." Without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked calmly through the restaurant, past the curious glances of other diners, out the heavy oak door and into the cool night air. The city sounds, a distant siren, the murmur of traffic washed over me, a welcome relief from the suffocating silence of that room. I took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the first breath I'd taken all night that didn't feel like it was laced with poison. I walked the 10 blocks home. I didn't want to get in a car. I wanted to feel the pavement under my feet, to put physical distance between me and the wreckage. Each step was a reclaiming of myself. By the time I reached our front door, my front door, a cold, hard resolve had settled deep in my bones. The house was silent, a museum of a life that was now over. Photos of me and Mark smiled from the walls, mocking me with their happy lies. I went straight to the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the top of the closet. I didn't cry. The time for tears would come later. Right now was for action. I packed methodically: clothes, toiletries, my laptop, the framed picture of my grandparents from my nightstand. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, began to buzz incessantly. A relentless series of calls and texts from my parents, from Zoe, and finally from Mark. I glanced at the screen. "Mom, Maya, please call me. We need to talk about this." "Zoe, he swore the baby was his. I swear, you have to believe me." "Mark, Maya, please, we can fix this. Don't do this." "Fix this?" The arrogance was staggering. As if this were a leaky faucet or a broken dish, something that could be patched up and forgotten. I picked up the phone, held my thumb over the power button, and shut it off. The silence was bliss. 30 minutes later, I heard his car pull into the driveway. I heard his key in the lock. He walked in to find me standing in the foyer with my suitcase at my feet. The fight had drained out of him, replaced by a desperate, pleading look. "Maya," he started, taking a step toward me. "Don't leave, let's just talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice flat. "You made your choice. And Zoe made hers. Now I'm making mine." "But, where will you go?" he asked, as if that were the most important question. "That is no longer your concern," I replied. I walked past him, opened the front door, and didn't look back. I got into my car and drove away from the home we had built together, the life I had loved, and the man I now realized I had never truly known at all. The rearview mirror showed the house shrinking in the distance, and for the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It felt like freedom. I spent the first 2 nights in a sterile, anonymous hotel room, letting the silence heal the raw edges of my shock. I turned my phone back on, blocking Mark's and Zoe's numbers immediately. The only person I called was a divorce lawyer my friend recommended. Her voice was calm and professional, a lifeline in my sea of chaos. My parents, however, were not so easily deterred. They found out where I was staying. I suspect my father called my school principal under some false pretense and showed up at my hotel room door on the 3rd day. And they brought Zoe with them. I opened the door to find my mother's anxious face, my father's grim one, and behind them, Zoe, looking pale and puffy-eyed. She wouldn't meet my gaze. "We are not doing this here," I said, my voice firm. "We can go to the lobby." We sat in a stiff, uncomfortable circle in the hotel's soulless lobby. My mother started, wringing her hands. "Maya, this has all been a terrible, terrible misunderstanding." "No," I cut her off. "It was not a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal, it was a public humiliation, and it was built on a foundation of lies." Zoe finally looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't know, Maya. I swear I didn't know about the procedure. He told me he wanted a family with me more than anything. I believed him." "You believed him because you wanted to," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "You saw a chance to take my life and you took it. The baby was just your excuse. Who is the real father, Zoe?" She flinched, and her silence was the answer. It didn't matter who it wasn't Mark. Her whole plan, her whole triumphant announcement, was a fantasy she had constructed to steal my husband. "And you," I said, turning to my parents. "All my life, you have made excuses for her. You have put her on a pedestal and taught me that my feelings were secondary. You taught her that she could take whatever she wanted without consequences. Well, look at the consequences now. Look at what your golden child has done." My mother started to cry softly. "That's not fair, Maya." "Isn't it?" I asked. "Did you, for 1 second at that dinner table, think about me? About my birthday? About my marriage? Or did your mind immediately go to how you were going to fix this for her?" The truth of my words hung between us, undeniable. My father looked down at his hands. For the first time, I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. Mark tried to contact me through the lawyer. He offered apologies, excuses, pathetic pleas. He admitted that he had been unhappy and felt trapped, not by me, but by the quiet, stable life we had built. Zoe, with her constant drama and chaos, had felt like an escape. He had let Zoe believe the baby was his because he was too much of a coward to face the fallout. It was a textbook confession of a weak man, and it only solidified my resolve. I instructed my lawyer to be ruthless. The house was in my name from an inheritance, a fact that became my saving grace. I wanted him out of my life, completely and irrevocably. I told my parents that I needed space, that I couldn't have them in my life while they continued to enable Zoe. The call was stiff and painful but necessary. The final confrontation was with Zoe, a week later. She called me from a blocked number, sobbing. "He left me, Maya. Mark is gone. He said he never wants to see me or the baby again. I'm all alone." I listened to her, and I felt nothing. The sisterly bond that had once tied me to her had been so thoroughly severed that her pain was just a distant noise. "Yes, you are," I said quietly. "Welcome to the world of consequences, Zoe. It's a place you've never had to visit before. I hope you learn to find your way." I hung up the phone and finally, for the first time since it all happened, I cried. I cried for the woman I used to be, for the marriage I had cherished, and for the family I had lost. But as the tears subsided, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. I was the one left standing. I was the one who had survived. Months passed. The seasons changed, turning the vibrant green of summer into the crisp gold of autumn. The divorce was finalized with surprising speed. Mark, stripped of his lies and faced with irrefutable legal and moral defeat, didn't fight me on anything. He signed the papers, vacated my house, and vanished from my life. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he had quit his job and moved out of state, a man running from the explosion he himself had lit. My relationship with my parents remained strained. We spoke occasionally, in short, stilted phone calls where we talked about the weather and my work, carefully avoiding the deep, fractured chasm between us. They were trying, in their own clumsy way, to understand the magnitude of what they had allowed to happen. I knew it would take a long, long time, if ever, for that trust to be rebuilt. As for Zoe, I kept my distance. My mother would occasionally drop bits of information into our calls, that Zoe had given birth to a baby boy, that the biological father was a man from her yoga studio who wanted nothing to do with them, that she was struggling as a single mother living in her old bedroom in our parents' house. I listened to these updates with a sense of detachment. The fiery anger had cooled into a scar, a permanent reminder of the wound, but one that no longer hurt to the touch. Her life was her own to live, and I was no longer a part of it. My life, on the other hand, began to bloom in the space that all the chaos had carved out. I poured my energy into my students, finding joy and purpose in their small breakthroughs and bright smiles. I reconnected with old friends who had been sidelined during my marriage, and their unwavering support was a balm to my soul. I started hiking on the weekends, finding solace in the quiet strength of the mountains. I slowly reclaimed my house, room by room. I painted the walls a warm, sunny yellow. I sold the heavy, dark furniture that Mark had picked out and replaced it with things that felt like me, light, airy, and full of color. One day, while cleaning out the last of his things from the garage, I found a box of his old belongings. Inside, tucked away, was a brochure for the vasectomy clinic. I looked at it for a long moment, this piece of paper that held the secret that had both bound me to him and ultimately set me free. Without ceremony, I tossed it into the recycling bin. I am still Maya. I am 34. I am a teacher, a friend, a daughter, and a woman who survived an unthinkable betrayal. Some days, a ghost of the past will surface. A song on the radio, a scent that reminds me of him, and a faint ache will resonate within me. But it's no longer a crippling pain. It is simply a part of my story. My birthday is coming up again soon. This year, I won't be in a fancy restaurant. I'll be on a hiking trail with my closest friends, watching the sunrise from the top of a mountain. I'll make a new wish, not for peace and happiness, but to thank the universe for the strength I never knew I had. My life is not the one I planned, but it is mine. And for the first time in a very long time, that feels like more than enough. For anyone out there who has been made to feel small, who has had their trust shattered, or who has been forced to carry the weight of someone else's secrets, know this. The truth has a power all its own. The moment you decide to speak it, to reclaim your story, is the moment you start to heal. They can try to take your happiness, but they can never take your strength. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human, navigating complex relationships and unexpected turns of events. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with someone who might appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.